Hi, welcome to podcast number 10 at Samarpan, and today we've got Rupa Chaubal. Apologies for the bad pronunciation.
No problem.
We're going to talk a little bit about mental health and all things psychologist and things like licensing and registration, as it's such a complex issue here in India. And as an overseas mental health professional, it's really interesting for me, and I think also hopefully we can educate people about what is actually out there, and for people when they're looking for a therapist, what they need to be looking for, because it's very confusing, isn't it?
It is.
And I think, you know, what I've seen over the years that I've been here now, 2.5 years, is that, you know, for a lot of people they struggle to differentiate between what is a therapist, what is a what is a guru, what is a pseudo therapist. I mean, there's such this whole raft, and social media makes it really difficult. Do you want to just introduce yourself first, Rupa? Maybe give our watchers and listeners a little bit about, you know, the work that you do and your background.
Thank you, Martin. First of all, I would like to really thank Samarpan, especially because the subject that we plan to talk about today is widely discussed but not very well understood. And with the kind of confusion that exists, I think, let me first introduce myself as the president of Psychologist Collective. This is an association headquartered in Mumbai, Maharashtra, however registered as Pan-India. And we are an association of practicing psychologists. We formed this association with the primary aim of working towards protecting the title of psychologists, and of course working with respect to the mental health policies as well as in the field of mental health advocacy. So this is broadly the spectrum for which Psychologist Collective plans to work. While doing this work, of course, we were careful about having all our members who have a full-time master's degree with supervised internship, and it's a regular coursework, not distance education at all, and have been practicing for some years in this field. So coming together as psychologists who are practicing, who have been in this profession, I have myself done 2 masters, one in counseling psychology, one in clinical psychology, and an MPhil from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And that's a brief about me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And could you maybe just sort of give me an overview of you know, how big a membership you have currently with your Psychologist Collective, and the types of people that are able to register or become a member, because not all psychologists are the same, so that then gets a little bit more confusing, and people will have a degree in, for example, clinical psychology, but technically they're not a clinical psychologist. I'm correct on that, aren't I?
Yes, I do understand where you're coming from, Martin. Absolutely.
So maybe you could explain a little bit more about that, because, you know, I think this is such a big debate, and I see it all the time on social media now, particularly on LinkedIn, about you know advocates for mental health, and about, you know, the importance of you know, people being accredited or licensed or you know skilled enough to practice in the field. So I'm going to let you just explain that.
Okay, we've just nosedived into the subject completely.
Yeah, we're going to dive straight into the subject. Yeah.
All right. I will try and simplify this as much as I can,
Yes.
Although it's a very complex subject. So our association basically looks at all those practitioners who have been practicing way before RCI was even formed. The Rehabilitation Council of India, which was formed as a response to India being one of the first countries to ratify the Disability Convention, and hence the need for establishing the Rehabilitation Council was felt. Since all these years, or almost since independence till now, I think one of the foremost issue that psychology has faced is that we do not have our own council, we do not have our own governing body, and hence As a result, the need for some form of affiliation so as to be able to work more authentically was felt, and hence, if you read the history of clinical psychology, the clinical psychologists, the senior ones now who probably are in their 80s or whatever, are the ones who approached rehabilitation council, because one component of clinical psychology deals with rehabilitation as well.
Yes.
Although, let me reiterate this, the entire profession of clinical psychology is not a rehabilitation profession by nature. There are several domains that fall under clinical psychology, and rehabilitation is just one of them.
Yes.
So the need for this affiliation basically was felt so that there is some government system where we are seen as professionals who contribute meaningfully and are associated with a certain population while we are working with them professionally. For years, RCI has had clinical psychologists with them. However, it is important to understand that because by nature clinical psychology is not a rehabilitation profession, hence, if you notice the change of where the RCI started introducing new courses and
Yes.
started governing clinical psychology more aggressively, started only after the Mental Health Care Act 2017. Which is where you see the mention under section 2G of the Mental Health Care Act. The title or the definition of the clinical psychologist is anyone who has completed their MPhil in clinical psychology from an RCI recognized institute.
Yes.
And is presently registered with them, or who has completed a UGC course and is presently RCI registered. So these are the two criteria that are mentioned under the section 2G. So now, on paper, technically, for someone to call themselves a clinical psychologist, the title or can be held only if they have an MPhil from RCI Institute. Now, here is where the clash comes up, because the Mental Health Care Act was passed in 2017, 7th April 2017,
Yes.
implemented in 2018.
Yes.
However, there have been several practitioners and some states where RCI has not been present at all over the years. So there was absolutely no RCI based degree or registration or education available in these states. Now, what this brings about is the problem with uniformity of application of the RCI rule.
Yes.
As a result, Maharashtra state was the first one that experienced this issue. I think RCI MPhil was introduced in Maharashtra state somewhere around 2017-18 in Amity University first.
Yes.
Then it was INHS Aswini, which is at Kolaba, which received their recognition. However, the course never really picked up. And then I believe there were one or two organizations at Pune who also received similar recognition from the RCI to run these courses. The problem again being that we have had practitioners practicing as clinical psychologists after their UGC recognized master's, full-time master's degree with supervised internship. It's because Maharashtra state did not have an MPhil, and specifically an RCI
Yes,
MPhil,
yes.
that our master's degree, UGC master's degree courses incorporated an entire segment of supervised internship, which requires us to go to rehabilitation centers, for de-addiction centers, psychiatric facilities, so on and so forth, or even special schools for that matter. So, and there is a coverage across the spectrum from child to adolescent and to adult and geriatric cases that have to be covered as part of this internship. Along with the entire structure where we are taught how to arrive at case history, MSc, diagnosis, differential diagnosis, defending the diagnosis, and thereafter, of course, learning to prepare our reports. So after having been trained on this kind of module, which is what is the RCI MPhil is also about, the scientist practitioner model, and of course also submitting a research thesis at the end of the 2 years master's degree, having gone through a somewhat similar kind of structure and format, although not the same syllabus, I would say, as a result of the different organizations involved in these degrees, we however gained the somewhat similar kind of experience in terms of being able to actually go ahead and work with patients who are identified with mental illness. After the inclusion of RCI MPhil, What about these people who have a full-time master's degree, who are trained on almost the same kind of curriculum, maybe with a little difference in the number of hours of supervision that they have received perhaps,
Yes.
which definitely can be covered up with certain number of years of practice along with supervision hours that they must have received, so on and so forth. This was not accounted for.
Yeah.
And we felt that there is a large task force that we are not looking at. There is a large, a large force of professionals that who are trained, but who are not going to receive licensing simply as a result of, the very narrow definition of Section 2G in the Mental Health Care Act.
Yes. Yes.
And then what about these people? Now, these are also the people who have been practicing for 20, 25, 30 plus years, Martin.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
a very long time.
It's a long time. Yeah.
That's almost their lifetime, you
Yes.
can say, of their work
Yes.
life. Some of them have, guided PhDs in psychology.
Yes.
They're really senior, like 70, 80 years plus.
Yes.
Do we now expect them to come forth for another degree just because we need an RCI registration? That's a
Yeah.
very simple question that we are asking.
Yeah.
What do you do with these people?
What do you think? I mean, I would have an opinion on that, but I mean, what do you think might be a solution to that? Because it would seem somewhat crazy to expect that people that may have been practicing, as you say, for 30 years, all of a sudden being told you need to go back and do a master. You need to go and do this, when they have potentially done some of them will have done training from overseas
Yes.
universities. And the like, and hold licensure from overseas.
They
These
do,
are people
yes.
that like myself. I'm a I don't fall under that because I'm an overseas professional. So I mean, what do you see as the solution? Because it is a bit of a mess, isn't it?
It's a very big mess, to be very honest.
Yeah.
I think psychologists in India are broadly divided under 3 different acts.
Yes.
It is the Rehabilitation Council of India, the Mental Health Care Act, and the RPWD, as a result of which psychologists are being seen under the RCI.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we have another 4th act, which is the NCAHP, which is the National Commission for the Allied and Healthcare Professionals.
Yes.
We are under 4 acts. This is going to be a nightmare if this is not sorted. And hence, a legal remedy is the first step.
Yes.
We all need to be brought under one single act, under one single body,
Yeah.
and then maybe form a separate council for psychologists, so that every specialization under psychology gets its due attention, be it with respect to the education, the training requirements, the exit exams and the licensing procedures,
Yes.
the ethics board, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I think the requirement first and foremost is from the legal standpoint that we need to sort this legal mess first.
Yes.
As an association, what we are trying to say, after having studied these 4 acts for so many years and having worked with these, trying to understand and utilize these acts, we have realized that the Mental Health Care Act technically should be able to identify all psychologists as mental health professionals.
Yes.
Which is not the case at the moment. And what really stands in the way is the Section 2G, which requires an amendment. That is one.
Yeah.
Secondly, all other psychologists except clinical psychologists. So if you read the NCAHP Act, it
Yes.
very clearly states that psychologists except clinical psychologists who are with RCI due to RPWD, that's very specifically written under the NCAHP Act. Again, under NCAHP, we have been placed under the behavioral health science professionals, and there are about 13 odd professionals, including podiatrists, with us, and we have no idea how that's going to work, because each of these schedules, so behavioral health science professional is a schedule.
Yes.
The council that will be formed will be for behavioral health science professionals. So I effectively have people who are podiatrists, who are maybe from psychiatric social work, and from some other, even psychiatric social work is understood because they still very, very closely aligned with the field of mental health. But what do I do with someone like podiatrists who have no understanding and know-how of the field of psychology, but they will be as part of the council and they will take decisions for psychologists? So this
doesn't make a lot of sense to me that you'd have a podiatrist under behavioural health. I mean, my understanding would be that yes, I could see why a psychiatric social worker would come under behavioural health. I can see why a counselling psychologist would come under.
Absolutely.
I can see why a, how could I put this? A psychiatric nurse would come under behavioural health, because there's essences of that
mental health
in there. Likewise, if someone is an accredited mental health counsellor or a therapist. And I'm not talking about just a generic therapist, someone calling themselves a therapist, but say, for example, someone like myself who holds a licensure which is certified substance abuse therapist, then, and we don't really have those types of things in India, do we? I mean, that's another part that
absolutely
there's no real differential. Everyone assumes that a mental health professional has to be a psychologist, because that's what the Act alludes to, but that's not strictly
followed.
Yeah.
And most importantly, Martin, if you read the NCAHP Act, the whole term of what behavioral health science professional means has not been adequately defined.
Yeah.
Nor has the title of who is a psychologist been defined. It has been picked up from the occupational codes.
Yes.
But that's a very broad or generic definition, and as you are aware, the ground realities for every country are different, and those have to be taken into account while defining the titles for that country.
Yes.
Including the education opportunities, the skill sets that are required given the specific cultural specificities of that country, so on and so forth. So there are several factors that need to be taken into consideration, and there is no definition even for this. So we are really in a mess. Psychology is a mess.
Yeah, it's going to take a while, isn't it?
It's going to take a while.
This sort of resolved. How do you think? And we'll get back to about someone like looking, and if someone's looking for a psychologist, and just sort of talking a little bit about psychology in general, and how do you feel that this holds back the profession? Because my take on this, that this mess actually holds back the profession.
It does.
Growing and also and I don't know how I can put this, that maybe people not recognizing that mental health professionals should be well paid, that there's this assumption that you're a mental health professional, and why would you want to be paid XYZ, and there's this whole thing where you've got people charging I think I saw one the other day where someone was advertising therapy sessions for 75 rupees.
Yes.
It's crazy.
It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
It's totally crazy. I think that's a very good question, Martin, because having worked, we are a fairly recently developed, formed organization. But in the last 4 years, we have also worked very closely with the State Mental Health Authority as their subcommittee member in Maharashtra state. And while doing that work, there were several challenges that we noticed. First, there is no clear model that connects the core competencies of a specialization to the kind of skill sets that you are expected to be able to show in your work, on field, wherever, or on the job for that matter. And as a result, even the job opportunities are not well defined. So I'm seeing a mix of confusion. There are times when the jobs are meant actually or can also be taken up by counseling psychologists, but there is a requirement of a clinical psychologist that has been mentioned, and with an RCI registration. You do not need that everywhere.
Correct.
You do not need RCI registration everywhere, because RCI deals with disability. If I'm working in the field or in the area of disability, then asking me to provide my RCI registration is a given. That's understandable, because presently they are being governed by RCI. However, if I'm not working with the disability, if I'm doing anything other than that, I do not need to provide an RCI registration number. I think this blanket misunderstanding related to RCI registration itself is an issue. Secondly, opportunities for other specializations to apply for jobs they are a question mark, obviously, because people who bring out these advertisements or advertise for these positions themselves lack clarity about how is a clinical psychologist different from a counseling psychologist. Can I have either of them, or do I need to necessarily employ someone with a clinical psychology background?
Yes.
That understanding is lacking. Thirdly, the pay scales are horrible. I'm really sorry to say this, but that's literally true.
Please don't be.
I'm saying this on record, but the pay scales are horrible. The kind of work that you expect, the kind of skill set that is expected, the kind of work pressure that we are expected to take, be it for the position of a school counselor, be it as a practitioner, even for those who are attached to psychiatric setups,
Yes.
the pay scale is not at all at par with the skill set and the training and the strenuous hours of supervision that we go through. There are so many additional costs, even if we are in India. So many of us still engage with international programs. They usually cost anywhere around 1 to 2 lakh rupees at times, especially if we are going for very advanced level trainings.
Yes.
And that's not easy. That's not easy to fund. Plus we have our supervision hours
Yes.
that we have to account for and pay for. So there are so many expenses just to be in this profession and keep going and work as a qualified professional. It's not just about taking a degree and then saying, okay, I need to be paid because I have taken this academic qualification. And I believe this is where RCI puts a limitation, because all their continuing education programs are majorly about disability, because they cannot talk about anything more than that. And whereas clinical psychologists need a range of clinical advanced trainings, be it assessments, be it psychotherapy, be it ethics. There are so many upgradations that have taken the APA ethics code as well. And there is absolutely zero discussion or understanding of that. So as a result, the kind of professionals that are working, they are at a disadvantage. They are neither being paid, but at the same time they are being expected to have higher qualifications. And that too, those sometimes are not available in their state. That education degree is not available. Whatever those educational degrees are, the number of seats are as low as 6 to 8 a year.
That's another issue, isn't it? The whole seats available.
Yes. How do you do that? And on an average, if you just look at Mumbai University, for example, they have anywhere around 80 to 100 students passing out every year from their master's degree courses. And you have only 6 to 8 seats in MPhil. What do the rest of them do? And it's not for the lack of talent or intelligence that they do not get the seat. It's simply the non-availability of seats. There is literally no other issue. And then are we essentially disqualifying these people from practice? So there has to be, with the kind of estimation that the World Health Organization has made in terms of the mental health burden that India is likely to face in the coming years, or is already facing at the moment, especially post-pandemic, I think this entire structure needs to be rethought.
Well, I mean, this is just, as an observer, do you feel that sort of moving down the line that the way that the education pathway is structured needs to change, and that maybe MPhil as it is in its current guise needs to maybe go? This is not being disrespectful, because obviously the standards of MPhil, and I've got MPhil psychologists working in our team, that maybe there needs to be a little bit more way of looking at how that sort of pathway goes.
Absolutely, Martin. In fact, this is something that we have been seeing. We can strengthen our existing courses and streamline them to make them more professional courses with a proper exit. Let's say we have you have the master's degree courses, which are roughly 2 years at the moment. We are saying that rather than bunching the entire education pressure at the master's degree level, you need to spread it out over the bachelor's level. That way you also have more gradation for positions available in the field of mental health, even in psychology. And then we are looking at keeping the master's degree extensively only for the supervised internship experience. So your theory can be covered at the bachelor's level and your internship extensively covered at the master's level. This itself should be enough. because presently the structure is 3 years BA, then 2 years MA, and then another 2 years of MPhil.
So, yeah.
And imagine if I decide I want to go for a PhD or a PsyD, that's just
And it's expensive. It's expensive being a student, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's expensive, and most importantly, it's very demanding in terms of your time. You cannot earn and fend for yourself
Yes.
during this time, because a PsyD would require you to essentially be available on campus 24/7 to complete your internship requirements, to complete your thesis requirements. So as a result, I think it's very important to also keep in mind that India as a country cannot afford to have years and years being spent in just education of psychology. We need to strengthen the existing programs and make them more application based. I think that is the glitch. For those of us who have studied psychology, be it clinical, be it counseling, from either say Mumbai University or SNDT University, we have had supervised internship. That itself can be expanded. That experience can be expanded to accommodate more. And I think what will really help is if at the state level, the public health department should be able to open up more facilities for internship, because there's going to be a large intake of students. So not being able to find adequate number of places for internship, that is also hurting these programs.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think, one of the things that from my own experience is that hybrid models of education, particularly when you're exposed to the clinical areas, is really, really helpful. But, it's very difficult if, for example, the internships for a month. It's very difficult because a lot of organisations do not want someone just there for a month. I mean, because you're not really going to be able to do much in a month other than probably get in the way. That's
True.
That's me having supervised staff in the past through education pathways back in the UK, and I used to have students come through where I worked, and they would come in for their placements, but they would be 3 to 6 months in the same place, and then they'd move. So I think it's very difficult for an organisation, oh, can I come for 30 days? And it's like, that's really...
That is a challenge too.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. So I think there's a whole, we need support from the local bodies. We need a statutory body exclusively for psychology. I think what this is also impacting is, Martin, presently, if you look at the RCA registration, it is just a registration number.
Yes.
It's not a license, because licensing requires different procedure, which the RCI, under its present act and the scope of the act, simply cannot provide for clinical psychology.
Yeah.
The act itself does not have that bandwidth. I think that's very important to understand.
Yeah.
In most countries, I believe the exit exam or the licensing exam has to do with the ethics exam, and that's simply not taken here.
Yeah.
Which I feel is a big loss, because when we are trying to develop a profession and we are saying that these are professional services, we want to identify this as a professional service, and we are looking at being responsible for the lives of people, I think it's pointless missing the whole ethics component. It's literally pointless.
I think that's a crucial part of any sort of course that is in sort of healthcare in general, be it behavioural health or even just sort of general health. Ethics is
the foundation.
It's a foundation, and I think that's something that it's something I've noticed, that some of the core concepts of what were sort of literally drilled into us sort of like from day one when we were students. I've got people coming out that that have done their masters, and they don't really know, and that sort of surprises me. I mean, it's not their fault. I mean, if people don't know or have never been exposed or taught or shown, then they're not necessarily going to know. But it does set people up to get themselves into questionable practices. And
I completely
Yeah.
agree. And one of the most disheartening fact related to this, I have come across, or rather, a lot of us, in fact, in Maharashtra, have come across these advertisements where the faculty is an MPhil RCA registered professional of clinical psychology, and they are teaching Rorschach online. Some of them claim to give cards and material online. That is not how it should be. And these courses, the eligibility for these courses is just about anyone and everyone.
Yeah.
What is happening is the validity and the reliability of that instrument comes down.
Yeah.
And this is a foremost ethic. If you notice under the APA, the assessment has its own set of ethics in terms of the kind of standardization that needs to be maintained with the material, with the administration procedure. You deviate there, you know that's going to impact the ultimate outcome of the test. And likewise, the reporting requirements for the test.
Yeah.
Now, when we see these kind of practices, or these kind of advertisements, it's really sorry, but it's heartbreaking, because this I wouldn't put it as anything other than malpractice, because it does not stand on the ethical grounds. It does not.
No,
It does not.
I'm in agreement. Totally in agreement with you, because one of the things that when you were talking a little bit earlier about, the supervision, the training, all of the stuff that, psychologists go through, and the perception is then, well, why are you charging this amount of money for my 1 hour session? And I try to sort of sometimes look at it and say, it's not just about the session. I mean, the person has gone through maybe 7-10 years of training. They should have professional indemnity insurance. They should be ongoing, having monthly clinical supervision. They also have to keep their records and notes. These are all the things that often the client that comes into the session doesn't actually see the back end of what's actually going on. They just sort of see, oh, I had this interaction, I had this conversation or chat, but there's so much more to it.
And plus the ongoing skill upgradation, the conferences, the research papers that we present. There's so much. There is this whole gamut to psychologists, and being able to practice and be able to keep up with the times.
Yes.
That is very important. Until maybe, few years back, maybe a decade ago or so, I wouldn't have thought of going beyond doing some basic, work related to eating disorders, maybe doing CBT, because that has been evidence-based for eating disorders. Until now, when I'm seeing cases of RFID, and RFID wasn't even spoken about a decade ago.
Yeah.
So keeping up with the times, being able to keep up with the changes that are taking place. Again, the differences of how some of us are trained on the DSM-5, some of us use ICD-11. That itself makes it, that's a different ballgame altogether. But it does create a lot of, nuances that a psychologist has to be trained on to be able to be pick up that on the clinical science way before you do your assessments with your patients. So I think as clinicians, there is so much, there is a whole gamut that comes under psychology, or a practice of psychology itself, and there is not a single governing body, Martin, at the moment that is able to honor this entire gamut.
And until that happens, the pay scales are going to remain the same, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And you're going to have people
abysmally low.
And you're going to have people charging 75 rupees, as I saw the other day, and in one of your colleagues' LinkedIn, and they were sort of talking about how this is where we've got to, that there's actually people out here now, and they're probably not actually psychologists, but
they are not.
I mean, I get applications for people want to come and work particularly at the rehab centre, and they say, well, I'm a de-addictions therapist, and I've got all, and then they don't have any training at all in de-addiction, which is a word that I've never come across until I came to India. But you understand, I mean, they've got no training, but that's what I do, and then they can't even explain, what addiction is, or actually understand or not have any knowledge of the modalities of treatment that are used, or therapies that are used in the treatment of people with substance use disorders. but they call themselves
agree.
specialists.
And that is, I think, you've just scratched the surface of what ugly stuff lies below the surface.
Yeah.
The truth being that today, being able to establish that I am a trained psychologist versus someone who claims that I do therapy
Yes.
is a big challenge. And this is majorly a challenge for the the people of India.
Yeah.
That first of all, mental health has recently become a thing for people
Yes.
to understand. Some of them still find it confusing to differentiate between a psychiatrist and a psychologist.
Yes.
Then we are talking about people having to be able to understand how to differentiate between a psychologist and someone who's not a psychologist. But there is no definition. There is no definition.
And then you have psychiatrists.
Yes.
Then you have psychiatrists sort of practicing outside of maybe their scope by
Yes.
doing therapy when they're not
Yes.
actually therapists.
Absolutely.
It's a mess.
It's a mess. I completely agree. That's another mess altogether. I would still say there are some who have managed to put in some years of training very consistently
Yes.
in psychotherapy, at least a form of psychotherapy, maybe a
Yeah.
school specifically that they follow. And hence, I would still say that in spite of being a psychiatrist, they are doing a good job.
Yes.
But when they claim that we do counseling simply because we are psychiatrists, that we are taken aback.
That's a concern, isn't it?
We are taken aback
Yeah.
because the kind of therapeutic training that a lot of our members or we have been through has been about submitting cases, going through completing certain requirements of certain number of supervision hours, being consistently in touch with whatever newer upgradations or advanced skills or trainings are coming up in that area. So it's a domain. It's not just therapy.
Yeah.
And what is psychotherapy? There is no definition to that either. So I see anything ranging from crystal ball gazing to CBT and that
Tarot cards. Yeah.
and I am totally perplexed. Like where do we limit this? Where do we end this?
Yeah.
By no means am I being or I'm trying to be disrespectful to any of these methodologies, because I'm sure there are people who use them and some who benefit.
Yes.
But when we talk about psychotherapy, and I'm looking at the APA definition of what psychotherapy stands for, you're effectively looking at psychotherapy as something which is a form of treatment which leads to certain specific outcomes as a result of evidence-based practices.
Yes.
And this entire spectrum is lost. It's lost in translation.
Yes.
Out here.
Yeah. Well,
Unfortunately.
my understanding is that there's no specific recognised psychotherapy degrees or courses really in India, is it? It tends to be.
No, we don't.
If I go back, and I'm just going to use the UK as an example because I'm lazy and it's easy, but I'll talk about the US as well in a moment. But the UK, you can go and you train specifically as a cognitive behaviour therapist.
Yes.
That's your training. There's specific specialisations, and that's how you don't say, oh, I'm this and I'm that. It's I'm this because that's what I've trained in.
Absolutely.
And I think that's probably at the moment it seems a little bit too generic. Which then brings me on to the point of when we look at people working in the field of substance use disorder and de-addiction, that's a mess as well.
Yes.
And where people are not trained but are calling themselves therapists based on the fact that they are in recovery themselves, and then obviously advertising themselves as therapists. Now, interestingly, in the US it used to be like that.
Oh.
Back in the 80s. It was only later on in the 80s that you could come out of treatment and 6 months later you could call yourself a counsellor because you were the state started to bring in some qualifications and things like that. I mean, now it's very, very much the US is very regulated, and it's actually state by state. So I can practice, say for example, with my licensure in Arizona, but that might not be in California. So not all of the so there's that, but at least there's a system, and maybe Maharashtra has to do do its own one to start with.
But here's the fact, Martin, even in the US, I understand with the whole user survivor movement is where I think things started transforming, and a lot of people who have lived those experiences started, talking a lot more, maybe tried to engage meaningfully with those populations, saying that we
Yes.
work with them. However, they did not use professional titles freely. Those titles weren't abused.
Yeah, I mean, there's protected titles, isn't there? I mean, this is what
Exactly.
we're going on to now. There's protected
Yes.
titles.
Here, none of the titles are protected.
Yeah.
Except for maybe a psychiatrist, because they have their own medical council.
Yeah, probably doctor. I think I understand that probably doctor is. I know in the UK, doctor, nurse, registered nurse is protected. But if you call yourself a nurse, that's not a protected title. So people say, well, I'm a nurse.
Yes.
But they're not actually a nurse. People can't then differentiate between a registered nurse and maybe someone that's just sort of working as a nursing assistant. It's a mess as well there. So it's not just in India, and I think I always have to sort of say that India is probably still in the early stages of developing mental health services, education, all of that side, and
True that.
the UK, where it is now, is vastly different to what it was like when I started 33 years ago.
It's a long time.
It's a long time, isn't it? That's why I've got grey hair and wrinkles, by the way. All right. so I mean, it does change, and I'm sure India.
Does change.
I mean, I'm sure the changes even in the last 10 years in India have been probably substantial.
They have been. That is true.
How has it changed? What do you feel has changed, or how is mental health being talked about a little bit more?
So I think I have about 22 years of work experience, and I can probably talk from my own experiences.
Please, yeah.
I remember when I completed my first master's in counseling psychology and I started working. Back then, the highest salary was 3,000 rupees a month. And which also, by the way, was being offered by a de-addiction center. And the role was extremely challenging and demanding.
I'm just going to stop you there just for a minute. So 3,000 rupees, for those that might not be from India, 3,000 rupees is around about £30 in UK money, and probably around about around about about $35 US money.
The US.
Yeah,
And that's for a month.
for a month.
And this is way back in 2002.
It's not that long ago.
It's not. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not that old.
No, it's not that long ago.
What we have progressed to now,
Yeah,
the salaries are about 20 to max, say 25,000 a month.
yeah.
And this is 22 years later.
It's progression, but it's not a lot in real terms.
Not
Is
at all
it?
real. Not at all real. This isn't realistic.
No.
In a city, in a metro city like Mumbai, which is, the standard of living is so high.
Yes.
The daily expenses easily overshoot for even the most basic essentials or commodities.
Yes.
25,000, where does this person live and what does this person do with that 25,000?
Yeah.
Right? Now, in this 25,000, we're also looking at dealing with people who have absolutely no understanding of what mental health is. So sometimes you have to start from absolute rock bottom with certain people, where they struggle to understand, why does my family member need help? Why should I bring them to you?
Yeah.
Why would they need medication? They're fine. We never took medication for any of our issues.
Yes.
And why do you want my family member to go through that?
Yes.
Once you start medication, they're going to be addicted. I'm not going to let them start medication. You do anything. You do therapy, that's fine by me, but you don't do medication with my person. You don't send them for medication anywhere.
Yeah.
So we're talking about working with a population that is still not very open to the idea of exploring the range of services that are available under the gamut of mental health.
Yeah. And the expectation of what the therapist will do, because
Yes.
I get the
You're
comment.
supposed to deliver miracles.
I get the comment, and this is just as an example, Martin, I want you to tell them to stop drinking. Make them stop drinking. When they come out, they won't drink anymore, will they? And I'm like, well, it doesn't quite work like
Work like
that.
that.
You know, so I mean, there is an issue around about also the expectation of, you know, what an outcome may be or how long it's going to take. I think we have to understand that, you know, not all clients are the same. And they
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. And sometimes, as we are all aware in the field of mental health, is I think when any person or any patient comes to us, we are only scratching the surface. What lies below the surface is a whole history. There are maybe several other comorbid diagnoses that are
Yes.
never really spoken, discussed, or probably the person has never received a mental health diagnosis.
Yeah.
That also is a bit of a challenge when it comes to India, because, oh my God, I have a mental health diagnosis. How am I going to say this to my colleagues, to my family?
Yes.
What if my partner abandons me because I have this? What if they file for a divorce?
Yes.
What if this is proved in the court tomorrow? What will happen?
Yeah.
What will happen to me and my family?
Yeah.
There are a range of issues we are dealing with.
Yeah.
In the last 22 years, the only difference I'm seeing, or a drastic difference I'm seeing, Martin, is today two main things. One is I'm seeing more and more people, whether they reach out for actual services or not, but they at least speak about this.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
conversations happening, whether in hushed tones, whether in corners, we are not aware, but the conversations are happening. And people have started becoming, warming up to the idea that there can be an ailment which is not physical and that
Yes.
needs attention from a professional.
Yeah.
So that's one. And second most important change that I'm seeing more men also seeking therapy, which wasn't the case about a decade ago.
Yeah.
Very few men walked into a therapy clinic. Today I see more men volunteering and saying, I think I have a problem and I need to seek help.
Yeah.
And can you guide me about how to go about this? And this is a very welcome change.
I think this reflects, even if you go back to, if I went back, say, where are we now? So if I went back maybe 40 years in the UK. All right, I'm not 60, by the way, just to say. No, so I wasn't working 40 years ago. I was still at school. The idea about people just talking about stuff, it was still quite limited. People talked about, in hushed tones about, oh, that person might be up there, he's gone off to, the psych hospital, or, a lot of people would talk, people didn't really talk much about it. And obviously as time has changed, people started talking about it, people started accessing services. And the men came later, as always, because there is,
Yes.
I think there's always a bit of machismo around the male of, males need to be strong, they can't show emotions, they shouldn't cry, and I still have that with a lot of, we get a lot of male clients, particularly in the rehab. Here in the outpatient, it's a little bit more mixed in terms of male and female, but certainly in the rehab, it's probably around about 70%, 30% mix, so sort of 70% male, and the old comments of, I just need to be strong, I need willpower, those types of quite unhelpful sort of beliefs
Absolutely.
are entrenched, and I think that's, that will change. It's changing.
I think that's taking time. For me as a mental health professional, what I see is that even India has had a very strong hold of patriarchy in the
Yes.
system, as
Yes.
a result of which discussing about emotions or men seeking help for emotional concerns is largely still a taboo.
Could I ask a question? And this might sound a really strange question, because I've got my own opinion on this. Do you think that there's any influence from colonial times around about this? The British influence?
Yes.
Would you like to elaborate? Because I've got my own opinion on this, and I say, don't worry, I just, please go ahead.
If we look at the history of India, even since you can say even during the colonial times,
Yes.
women have had to struggle to even get education.
Yes.
And that itself has been a movement in Maharashtra kind of pioneers in that field as well.
Yes.
Education for women and girls.
Yes.
We have a history in the state of Maharashtra where those movements have taken place, and then finally their right to education being
Yeah.
acknowledged. But even today it feels sad that we are celebrating history where the first woman became a doctor in India, which was not originally seen as how India would perform, because India, if you look at the history, the Nalanda University, etc., women were as accomplished or as scholarly as men were.
Yes.
So in between, with the invasions and the whole, the entire colonial times that we see, the whole fabric of the society changed, the culture changed.
Yeah.
As a result of which, and it's not just about this, Martin, sadly, it is also with respect to the whole LGBTQI movement.
Yes.
If you read the Kama Sutra text, it is a bit neutral on this matter, but it does not consider being from LGBTQ community as a taboo or something to be shunned or not identified. Likewise, if you look at the caves and the whole carvings on that, there are explicit carvings,
Yes.
Of same sex or same gender people coming
Yes.
together,
Yes.
and performing acts. So there, I think India has had its own very open and diverse culture.
Yes.
But over the years, with the colonialization, with the invasions that happened,
Yes.
the entire fabric and the culture and everything and the value system underwent drastic change. And I think we are seeing that even today.
Yes.
Even with respect to as simple things as the body size, like I need to have a zero figure, I need to have an hourglass figure. Where does that come from? If you look at Kama Sutra, it says a woman looks beautiful if she's voluptuous.
Yeah, I mean, different cultures look at it differently, don't they?
So
But that's probably a lot to do with the influence of social media
absolutely.
now, isn't it? With this whole, this is what is defined as beauty. The whole thing of, having paler skin. It's another one.
Yes.
I mean.
Sadly, yes.
Yeah, my daughter is half British, half Thai. So she has pale skin now. Everyone's sort of like a lot of her friends. Oh, you've got the best skin because it's. Yeah, and then you have people wanting to get whitening cream, and I mean, there's this whole.
Yes.
This probably, and you touched on about working with people with like eating disorders, and these types of things is a big issue within sort of the whole body dysmorphia, sort of eating disorder or disordered eating stuff that's going on, and also it plays into depression, anxiety, and all sorts of other stuff. I need to be this or I need to be that. If I'm not this, I'm excluded or whatever.
I agree. There's I totally agree with you, and I think psychology as a subject or even as a science for that matter is very, very closely knit with the culture and the value of that particular community.
Yes.
If we are not looking at that, I don't think we can even practice psychology without trying to understand the culture and the stereotypes and the biases and whatever else that comes with that culture. It's very important to understand that, because that itself will at times defines whether we differentiate this as normality or abnormality.
Yes.
So when you go to the absolute foundation of psychology, like I still recall reading the definition of what abnormality is in my foundation textbook of psychology, and that stumped me because I was expecting not having an illness, the common sense things that we would apply, that okay, if somebody does not have an illness, then that means they are normal. If they have an illness, they are normal. So and that I realized after reading that definition, okay, nothing prepared me for this.
Yeah.
We're looking at how the culture defines that.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think this is really important that a lot of the theories and models of therapy are not necessarily, they've been developed in Western countries. Now, that's not to say that they won't work, but there has to be some cultural awareness about how to apply them. It'd be, we've had to make those adaptations in the rehab, that there's certain things that are specifically quite vastly different to if I'm working with clients from India, quite different to working with a client from the US or the
Yes.
UK or
Yes.
Australia. Yeah, very different.
I completely agree with that.
Well, we've done an hour, so let's wrap up. And I think and I really appreciate. We probably need to talk a little bit more. This is so
I'm glad to hear that. I thought I went off the rails.
But just to wrap up, what would you say to anyone looking for help, and maybe target this at just sort of people that are looking for help for a therapist and stuff? What should they be looking out for? What should they, if they've got a loved one that's looking for help, what should they be looking for in terms of where they go for therapy? I'm not talking about specific organisations, but what should they be looking out for to make sure that the professional or the organisation is doing the right thing?
I would definitely want to go to someone who has had hands-on training and experience. It's the same as going to a doctor. If the doctor has got a degree from a distance education, you wouldn't dream of going to them because they would have absolutely no experience of dealing with patients. Likewise, when it comes to a psychologist, whether it's a master's degree, whether it's an MPhil, whether it's a PhD, first criteria technically should be the level of education that they have. They may possess any of these formal UGC recognized degrees, preferably full-time, because some of these full-time degrees do have a supervised internship experience. So someone who has hands-on training experience as part of their degree and curriculum. Secondly, getting trusted references from other mental health professionals, because they are usually connected to the ones who are well trained and who are into ongoing supervision, receiving ongoing supervision. So you're in relatively safer hands. And of course, last but not the least, sometimes getting a reference from a dear one, or maybe a friend or anyone around you who is able to help you understand why this person is a professional. Do they have the requisite training, degree, and plus the experience, and some recommendation from someone which tells you that yes, this is a professional who is professionally trained, and hence you are in a relatively safe hands and you can go and seek help from them.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much. I really hope that your movement sort of also promotes the need for mental health professionals to be better recognised, better paid. Okay, as well. My organisation would kill me. They'd be saying, "Oh, my staff would be coming in for pay rises now." But realistically, I hope that I'm sure that in time things will change, and I really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Martin. It was lovely speaking to you.
Thank you.